Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 621st New Social Environment. I'm Raven, the program's associate here, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Barbara Pollack, Liu Shiyuan, Miao Ying, and Lilly Wei. We're thrilled to welcome poet Abby Romine here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. The Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter and that here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded lands and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for actual necessary decolonial work, but a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guests and hosts. Independent curator and critic Barbara Pollack writes regularly about contemporary art for such publications as the New York Times and Art in America, and is the leading authority on Chinese contemporary art. She is co-founder and co-director of Art at a Time Like This, a platform for artist-free expression at times of crises. Born in 1985 in Beijing, Liu Shiyuan is now based in Beijing and Copenhagen. The scope of her art practice comprises of photography, video, stage performance, and spatial installations. Recent solo exhibitions include For Jord, Tanya Banakadar Gallery, LA, and in other words, Please Be True, White Space Beijing, and among many others. Based in New York and in Shanghai, Miao Ying is best known for her projects and writings around Chinese internet online culture and her Stockholm syndrome with censorship. Her practice juxtaposes Western technology and ideologies with contemporary China, highlights the new modes of politics, aesthetics, and consciousness created during the representation of reality through technology. New York-based independent curator, writer, journalist, and critic, Lilly Wei writes on global contemporary art and emerging art and artists, reporting frequently on international exhibitions and biennials. She has written dozens of publications here and abroad and is a longtime contributor to Art in America and a contributing editor at Artnews. And now passing it over to you, Lilly.
I thank you so much, Raven, and welcome Barbara and Miao Ying and Liu Shiyuan. So anyway, I just would have a little footnote to start. New art from mainland China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan was introduced to New York at the Asia Society and at PS1 in 1998. It was a comprehensive, astonishing, first of its kind exhibition called Inside Out, curated by Gaoming Liu. It was also astonishingly successful, launching an entire cohort of contemporary Chinese artists into the Western world and I guess into the Western art market too. But in any case, Mirror Image, while it is an independent and more succinct venture, is in some ways a follow-up to that, also at Asia Society, and it's surveying recent trends in contemporary Chinese art and also showing artists who haven't shown much in the US so far. So even though they do have an international profile. So anyway, just to start off with Barbara Pollack, who is the curator of the exhibition, which is, by the way, up until December 31st. Is that right, Barbara? It's been extended. So if those of you who haven't seen it, you have time to go and please take a look at it. So anyway, could you talk a little bit about the show and how you selected the artists and perhaps what are some of the themes that you chose to highlight?
Yeah, for sure. I should just say that when the Inside Out show in 1998 was my awakening to art from contemporary China. And I began going to China in 2004. And between 2004 and 2019, I went dozens of times to China and wrote a couple of books on Chinese art. But around 2010, I had already written about many of the artists of that first generation that showed in Inside Out, like Abby Romine and Zhang Xiaogang and Zhang Wan. These people are international figures at this point. But what I got very curious about is what was happening with the generation that were younger than them, a generation born in the 1980s that grew up with all the changes that I was witnessing in China, that had not been exposed to the Cultural Revolution or to Mao Zedong. They had grown up post that period in a new China, one that was economically developing at a rapid pace, that was urbanizing overnight, and that was opening its doors to international influences really quickly. So I'm thrilled to see the show at Asia Society. Please keep it. I'm thrilled to have the show at Asia Society because we worked on this a long time, and Michelle Yun, the former director, and Karina Evangelista have completely seen this through obstacles like COVID and tariffs and supply chain blockages, and still saw the show come to fruition. So when I'm walking down the block and I see mirror image up there, I think of it as a total miracle that could not have happened without the full wherewithal of the institution. Next slide. Yeah. This is the opening room, an installation shot of the first room of the exhibition. You can see Liu Shiyuan's photograph on the right. The installation you're looking at is by Nabuchi, and the painting is by Sui Jie. This is all about urbanization and globalization and the impact it had on these three artists. We'll talk later about the impact on Liu Shiyuan, but I think what I just want to point out is that this installation was originally done in Beijing, buying supplies from IKEA, but because we couldn't ship this year from China, the museum assembled this installation with the artist's approval by going to IKEA online and eBay for older IKEA products. And this is a prime example of how globalization has affected the creativity of artists of this generation. Next slide. And there's Miao Ying in the installation of her film Surplus Intelligence and Pilgrimage to Walden 12. So we have video, we have TikTok, we have sound, we have AI. All these new technologies are in the show that weren't explored by the older generation as much. I also just want to point out that all of the artists in this exhibition were very well educated. Most went to undergraduate schools in China and then went to graduate schools in the United States and Europe. But Miao Ying came out of the academy in Hangzhou, where Zhang Peli, the godfather of Chinese video, teaches. And that has influenced a whole generation to explore new media. And so people have the impression that Chinese art is going to be behind the times, or calligraphy, or Buddhas. And instead, we are, because of all the influences flooding into China, starting in the 1980s, Chinese artists are often way ahead of the curve in terms of using technology. So that's all I want to say now, unless Lily, you have other, what didn't I say?
I think you're okay. Actually, by sharing the screen, I have I can't get to my notes, but it's okay. We'll figure that out later. I'm sure the conversation will just organically evolve, but let's go to the artists now. Would just I guess we'll do it alphabetically. So Shiyuan, would you talk about your work first and just tell us a little bit about what the work you have in the show is, and then, as I said, maybe a little bit about your work in general or how it is part of that, your practice.
Yes, thank you. I think I have always been seeing myself. Can you hear me? Yes. I have always been seeing myself as a director instead of an artist because I love creating images, no matter if it's on drawings, on still image, like a photography, or I make a video art. But the performative part of my works is always the most interesting part in my thought, and is also what I focus on. It might be where my art practice started from. I did a theater design when I was in Beijing before I moved to New York. And then when I was studying at SVA in New York, I focused on performance and photography. So I look for my actors, which in my works here means images or footages from myself or other people. And then I invite all the elements to act together on telling one single story in my photo works. And afterwards, I man the stage design, I man the lighting, even the sound and the smell that can be expressed through an image. So this is basically how I work. I use photography as my stage to do my theater piece. Yes, I'll stop here.
Okay, Miao Ying, then. Miao Ying, would you like to talk about your work?
Yeah, sure.
And your
maybe we can go to the slide, actually the one that we stop at plus, the 12th one. Right, thank you. So I think, like Barbara said, my work has kind of influenced by technology, like for when I was in college, because my professors, like a lot of them are conceptual artists and video artists. So I always felt like I wanted to, so I think I started to work with technology, like the work we're seeing now, Chineseness Plus, was created in 2016, commissioned by New Museum. So I started to I think my first online project was made even when I was in college. And then since it was about the internet, and since then, I have been always working with the internet, and now more involved with AI and machine learning. I just think Chineseness Plus, and if you go to the next one, hardcore digital detox. Thank you. So I'm trying to, so Chineseness Plus and both hardcore digital detox and Chineseness Plus were commissioned from museum at first, was an online commission. So Chineseness Plus was from New Museum, and hardcore digital detox was from M Plus Museum in Hong Kong. And then I felt like I would start my work starting from building a website. So to me, websites are like a blank canvas. So I started to put elements into the website by my project. I think most of the time are I would create a 2-year, usually 2 to 3 years. I'll be focusing on one project, and this one project usually is a fake ideology. And I try to brand the ideology, by building the website, and it's, it looks kind of like in between of a commercial website or some kind of political propaganda. So I would always websites are always the core of my work, and then from there, I would later on develop it into installations, and I like to call them internet installations, because museums starting to asking me to show the piece, my online artworks in a physical space, and I felt like all the works has already been available online. So when you are at the viewing, at the physical space in the museum, the website is absent, but you're more it's more like you enter into a experience, like a lifestyle store. I think we everyone got influenced by Apple. Like you see the product and they go to the store and they experience it. So I want my installation to be kind of a promote of the ideology, which is a fake ideology on the website. So a lot of my installations, it has to do with the project I'm working on, and when you walk into it, it feels like for this one, How Could You Detox, it almost felt like a retreat. Everything is like very natural, and it's kind of offering people options of having a hardcore digital detox. So yeah, I think that's like overall my practice in general and my work.
Well, Barbara said that one of her criterion for this particular exhibition was artists who were post-cultural revolution, post-Mao, born, well, both of you actually were born in 1985. And I think on your website, I think you said that you were part of the first post-internet, or wholly, into the internet age. So how did that, how did you choose your media? I mean, was that just such an obvious thing to do to become more of an online artist, or digital, using that kind of technology? And not everyone does it, of course, but and even even in your generation, but still, the fact that it seems to be the maybe the new lingua franca, right? I mean, so would both of you talk about that as internet generation artists?
Can I say first? I think our generation grew up with computers. I remember like the first time that I touched a computer was in elementary school. It's probably first grade or second grade. We enter a computer lab and then you take off your shoes and it's like touching it. And I think when I was in middle school, my parents bought me my first personal computer. And I think our generation kind of witnessed this, was involved in the very beginning of the internet in China, and witnessed this period of time. Now you think of the internet in China, this heavy censorship. But actually, when I was in college, like Google or Facebook or Instagram was all available. So and then like, around 2010, everything was banned, and then this local internet tycoon starting to develop. Like WeChat became big, and Tencent became bigger because all those Western platforms were censored. So I think it's very natural for me, because like it's kind of like the technology that I grew up with, and I think like each generation, it's like now younger generation likes to use TikTok. I think each generation just, have their own voice in their technology. So to me, it has always been, and I'm very interested in, I think my work also like evolved with the technology, like when before 2010, I think my earlier piece was more, focused on censorship itself, and then like later on it became, I was like, when the social media and the smartphone were available in China, I felt like I was way much more interested, I thought, in self-censorship, which is I thought much more powerful. And then it tells people, what all like the netizen and everyday people's thoughts on like commentary on things, and very creative. So that's just my experience with, because I live in it, I grew with it, and I came to the States and I went back to China, and I have experienced like the different phase of like embracing the local platforms, or like at first there's rejections because the local Chinese platforms has more heavier censorship. And then like you realize that if you're living inside of it, they have to embrace it. And I feel like I have to take more of the richness of self-censorship. So it's just like a part of the environment that I'm in. That's how I look at the technology that I'm using.
And you,
Shiyuan.
Shiyuan.
I think I'm actually not so much on the internet because in a way I don't really want myself to be there and or to believe in it. I think it's very frustrated. I remember that after I give birth and then I was breastfeeding, there's so much things that are unknown for me. And instead of feeling the baby or experience through the mistakes that I make, and my husband just directly always search online, always ask Google what to do. So, so I mean, the art medium I use, photography or we see image making, is really not so much related to the internet. It started from when I was 8 years old that I joined the class of photography, but I really want to care about other people. I feel like at least for me, I consider our emotions are super valuable. So in order to get the feeling from other people's life experiences, I have to understand them, to know about their cultures. So that's actually why I use online source to search, to see their works, to hear from them.
Where do
Yes.
you source your images from?
Some of them are from my footage, and some of them are from the online sharing website. It's kind of like a recycling station that, you know, we have the recycling station in our backyard that all the trash people don't want to throw away, they put in the room, and the other people can pick up and then reuse it. So that website is this station, but for images. All the filmmakers and professional photographers, if they take 100 photos, they eventually choose one for their commercial work. So the leftover 99 photos, they can put it online with copyright free to share with other people for their use.
Hmm.
And I just want to say, Lily, that with this researching this generation, they all had websites, but like every single artist of this generation, I was able to locate and do research before a trip to China by contacting them and looking at their work on website. Like this was a real communication tool to reach curators all over the world, whereas the older generation would not have had those opportunities. So it was very interesting to me.
Yeah, because I think, the language is very, as you know, was said, the language is very natural, or the ability to do that is very natural for just about everyone, whether you're actively using it or not. So then the reverse of that is, are Chinese art schools still stringently teaching you about traditional art forms, art making forms? And does that feel natural or not? Does that feel unnatural these days? Any, because it was, it used to kind of pride themselves like, yes, everyone could do everything. I mean, they were really trained in crafting, like that they all learned how to, well, they could be, representational artists as well as abstract, as well as digital, as well as photography. I mean, there was a whole,
and there also was, for a long time when I visited art schools, that the first 2 years were totally devoted to realist painting.
So are they still doing that?
I think you still have to do that to get into art school.
I think in foundation, you still, like, first of all, we all, I think both me and Shiyuan had to train in Russian like realistic painting style. Like, you have to have a really good skill of painting and drawing in order to get into the school, because that's the only way to get into the art school. You cannot send a portfolio. It's all like one test. You go there, it's a fixed time, and everyone like do a drawing and do a sketch, and then you're waiting for the offer. And then once you get in, I'm pretty sure now, like even for like media arts, like the first year you still have to do foundation, and it's like oil painting and realistic paintings, and
Does anyone have anything to add to that? Or I was just thinking, you know, you mentioned our generation too a lot. Could you define some of the characteristics of your generation, which is, as I said, around that, you know, pivotal point of 1985, plus or minus? That's what the age of most of the artists in your show is, right, Barbara?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Right in the middle of the 1980s is when
Yeah,
they were
right.
born.
So yeah.
I really like what Barbara said in the statement of the show, how like there's Starbucks next to Forbidden City. And I was talking to Barbara the other day when we had artist talk at Asia Society Museum, that I forgot to mention, like it's such a vivid memory of my childhood, is that when I was first grade, I think sometimes in 1991 or 92, they opened the first KFC in Shanghai, and it was at this 5-star hotel, Dongfeng Hotel, at the Bund, which is, I don't know, like maybe equivalent of the most fancy hotel in New York, or like the most expensive, you know, like on Wall Street or something. And it's, so anyways, like KFC was opened on the 2nd floor of this 5-star hotel, and people were waiting, like bring their kids and waiting in line. And
it was expensive.
Yes, it's very expensive. My parents brought me and my cousin, and they ordered like a mashed potato and then maybe a burger, and they were watching us eating it. And I was like, why are you not eating? And they were like, we're not hungry, because it was so expensive. It's like the fanciest, it's way more expensive than I think people can order for a table of, like, you know, Chinese dishes, best restaurants. So like I often like just, I think like a couple months ago, like I saw like McDonald's you know, like leaving Russia, and they show footage of in Russia how like the first, you know, McDonald's was in Russia, and it was exactly the same in the 90s, and people were waiting, like were waiting in lines. And I think what's special our generation, and I know that the Shiyuan is from Beijing, and I think the first KFC, I think Beijing might have the first KFC before Shanghai, a year before Shanghai. And where was that, Shiyuan? Do you remember that? The first KFC.
It's probably in Tianmen, you know, close to Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, like always in those like key, you know, golden locations. And I felt,
yeah, that was the thing that really fascinated me, was that you would begin finding things like the Starbucks in the Forbidden City that I would feel is like a juxtaposition of two worlds. But the point I wanted to make about this generation is they don't view it as a conflict of East versus West or a Westernization of China. They view it as the 21st century, the reality of the 21st century. And many of them just think about these things in non-binary ways now, as like a whole new cultural phenomena they're not, like we used to describe Chinese artists as a bridge to the East, or a combination of East versus West, or things like that. But this generation, we describe them as transnational, because they grew up with so many different influences that it's no longer one opposed to the other. And I think that's fascinating as a movement in contemporary art right now.
But don't you think it's a matter of perspective of where you are located, and how you are looking at that, and who you're, you know, well, if you're an artist, who your audiences are. I mean, you know, like Chineseness comes up as an issue, but how Chinese do you have to feel when you're in China, right? And versus how Chinese you might feel in Denmark, or even in Brooklyn, right? I mean, I always find that. And also, by the way, that Starbucks in the Forbidden City also kind of jolted me when I looked at that, because in a way I thought, well, you know, why did that, you know, why Starbucks? Why is that contemporary in a way, you know, except for the kind of that easier access, you know, to all kinds of brands, but isn't it still a way of like American colonialization, via, I mean,
Yeah,
why?
I think that's the way we who
That's
grew
what I
up in the 90s with multiculturalism would look at it. But I'm saying when I interviewed these artists, even though they were living in China, most of them did not describe themselves as Chinese.
But if they're living in China, would they have to? As opposed to if they were living in
No,
the-
no, they were really
Oh,
particular.
you mean
They would not want me to write about them as a Chinese artist.
Uh-huh. Well, I think that, that might be a different perspective, right? I mean, that would be, what do you think?
Liu Shiyuan,
Yes. Do you have
from
any?
your
So you're,
perspective, yeah, go ahead.
no, go ahead. So you're in Denmark. What do you think? Yes, about that particular identity issue.
Like the title of me being called a Chinese artist.
Yeah,
Yeah. Or do you see yourself as a Chinese artist? Perhaps.
Yes. Yes, I see myself as a Chinese artist, but I noticed that the moment I noticed I'm definitely a Chinese artist, it's not, it didn't start before I moved to Denmark. I think that in the beginning that I always ask myself that how to become Chinese artist and what to do to be Chinese. I couldn't give an answer. But after I moved to Denmark, that got into the cultural fight with the Nordic culture, when someone pushed me to do not be so Chinese, and then that is a moment suddenly I notice what I want to be and who I am, is when people ask me to do not be Chinese. And then I noticed that actually I am Chinese. And every single day of my life, I fight for making my kid here 50% of Chinese, carrying the culture, which is difficult, but I do that. And I really measure it. It should be no less than 50%.
but in what way is your work Chinese? Is there Chineseness in your work?
Yes,
Oh, that's
definitely. And there's no way that I can deny that, because otherwise what? I don't know if it's a failure for me to be international or global, because those two words are also not function in a way that we use in contemporary art, because those two words in the beginning means business. When you do international or global business trend, like you produce HM in China and you sell them in the West, that's where the words come from, international and global. It never means anything else besides earning money and doing business together. So for me, that I don't know if it's even possible to be global. So in that way, I am Chinese, and I think that my work carries a way of Chinese aesthetic, not on purpose that I made in that way, but that's because of who I am. So my works become like that. I guess so. And I think the more I fight for my culture by living here in Denmark, the more my works will look like a little bit carrying Chinese culture.
Oh, interesting.
And Ying, how do you see that?
Yeah, I can reflect Shiyuan's feeling, because I felt like, I think if, especially for us who were educated in the West, I think I can't speak for her, but I felt like myself, there's a period of time, because we kind of grew up, in internet, and when you're in China, before you were in college, or when you were in college, you really look up to the West and you think, oh wow, like, because all those contemporary modern movements were coming, because there was kind of a blank of history in China, right? So everything, our history is coming from the Western. So I think at least for me, when I was in college, I really into like doing something is more abstract, and I don't think it's like erasing my identity, but just felt like it's cooler to, if my work doesn't have any Chinese identity in it at all. It seems like it's greater. But then I think, especially if you had experience like really leaving China and study abroad, then you're starting to realize that, you know, like how your experience and yourself can be shaped, you know, by your culture and who you are. And I felt I am getting like, I wanted to be more honest and natural about my identity. And, you know, I also felt, because my recent work, the AI work, like a lot of it I did research in Chinese ink painting, which is something that I felt like I didn't care before. You know, I didn't have, I felt like I was ignorant in like the traditional Chinese art history. Like it was like I studied everything, you know, Western art history and all that. And I felt I actually really enjoy looking back, you know, not just like the contemporary Chinese identity, the Chinese identity in general. And I felt there's a lot of things that's bigger than me, you know, something that's maybe what your mom says, or something in my philosophy mind, like it's very Chinese. And I think it's interesting to explore.
How does it affect you being not in China? How has that affected your work? Actually, how much time do you spend outside? I mean, you know, do you actually you spend most of your time in the United States and in Denmark, or do you go back and forth? I mean, some artists have absolutely no home; they're just all over the place. But others are, you know, more or less based somewhere. So I assume you're more or less based in New York now, and you in Denmark. I mean, in Copenhagen. Is that right? Or at least for now?
I was really based like half and half. I was based like in Shanghai, and like up until COVID, I felt like, oh, I'm based in New York. Like before that, like I felt like, you know, because I have to travel a lot for my work, so I go to Europe a lot every time to install exhibitions. Yeah. And so I felt like, you know, I almost spend 1/3 of my time in Europe and 1/3 of the time in Shanghai, and then I 1/3 of the time in New York until like COVID. Then I felt like I'm like, you know, in the States. That's the longest time I've ever really been in the United States.
And you, Misha?
I think I never accepted to say that I'm based in Copenhagen, because the word based is so strong for me, and I couldn't find any single place that I'm based in. But I am worried. I'm very worried about all kinds of conflicts, because I live in Denmark and being Chinese artist without being in China. So I'm basically talking to my Chinese friends without seeing them, and reading their posts online without knowing what exactly happened to them on that day. I'm also worried that I might be naive. In my mind, the looking of Chinese streets are actually old from 10 years ago, before I moved out. And I assume that I still know so much about it. Of course I know, and I feel it, I understand it, but I'm pretty sure that until now, it's not gonna be 100%, and maybe not even 80%. Maybe a few years later on, it will now be even 50%. When the number goes lower than 50%, I think then the question is, if it's really like a problem for me of saying that I'm Chinese, or I could just drop the question, always say that I am Chinese if I say so, and I'm always myself. But I think my answer is not like that. I think it takes so much effort to approach how we want to be and who we want to be. Just like everyone else, that we all have to live so hard. So it's not easy, but I keep doing it. I think at least I should insist on making myself to be how I am from before.
But as I said, has it affected your work? I mean, does that affect your work, not being in China, you know, as a Chinese artist, perhaps, you know, but more as an international artist? or has it no effect at all because you already know what you're making, and you are of a generation where you can be almost anywhere in the world, and you can also work, you know, through other portals. And
I think definitely that my works are combined with my lab. Sometimes I cannot really separate them. Like I cannot tell if this is true or if this is like my dream. So I think overlap is always the main keyword to describe my life and my work, because I use different mediums and mix them together. I do performance in photo, and then maybe I do photo in video, I do video in photo. Just like that, I'm living in the overlap area of Chinese and Nordic cultures. But of course, what made the overlap is the rest of the part, is the differences. So I can't say that I love the feeling, but I'm very used to and feeling comfortable to always stand on the boundaries of art mediums, and then on the boundaries of different cultures. I think that I can get a better view of everything. So, but the feeling of not knowing 100% of the truth, I think sometimes it's like the way I work and live. It's a little bit like the kids game, seek and hide. I think it's this summer I noticed that the name of the game is Seek and Hide, although I have been calling it Lost and Found for many years. but anyway, I think my interest, I'm interested in looking for something that I know is there. I know it's there, and I don't have to invent it by myself, but I just have to find it out. So if the thing that I need to look for, I don't call it the truth, then I think I'm seeking for maybe a better word should be knowing. I don't think it's the truth. There's no things called the truth, but I want to look for knowings, just for knowing more and better about other people and other lives. I think that's the way I see my life and work combined together.
yeah, there is a difference between like Chinese American artists. I mean, those who are raised here, they often do have identity issues of a certain kind, like because they live in a culture that isn't Chinese. And I was just thinking, as you know, artists who have been educated in China, who live there, that the perspective has to be entirely different. But anyway, be that as it may, you know, Barbara, you also there are 7 artists in this show, or perhaps 8, but there are 7 artists that are officially who are officially listed in the show, and 5 of them are women, which is a fairly high percentage. And just to go back to Inside Out, that show had very few women in that exhibition. So this is another kind of turnaround. And this is also perhaps a generational thing, maybe or not, but you know, I think you mentioned that there is that one child policy. And I think you also mentioned that sometimes if the family has only one child and it is a girl, they perhaps get better treatment than if they were a girl in a 2-child family where the boy would get better treatment. So anyway, is any of that an issue, or is feminism of any kind, which hasn't really been, at least not feminism is seen here, you know, is that an issue at all among Chinese women artists?
Of course, the artists who are here can say more, but I just want to point out that not that long ago, feminists who were in China who were posting messages online for social gatherings that were not really radical in our mind, like a protest against harassment in the subways was one of them. They were arrested and put in prison. So feminism is not exactly a safe word to use in China. And which goes to Ying's point about the creativity that goes on in interacting with the internet in China, because there's so many words and attitudes that you have to do a meme for or a different phrase for or something. But what I think is really interesting is in a certain way, it was totally arbitrary that it came out that way. But and I think it's interesting that the Venice Biennale this year is mostly women artists. I think if you're just looking for who is making the strongest statements today, you find that women are the artists that really have something to say and that speak, like speaking to this issue of globalization and how our personal lives have changed. I really found an abundant amount of women artists dealing with this. But I don't know, some of this is just the way who was available and what works we could get and things like that. But I was delighted that it came out this way. Because as you pointed out, Inside Out was, I think, 100 artists and maybe 5 women. So it's great to me that this is happening and that there's this blossoming. And I'll let Ying and Liu Shiyuan comment on whether they view themselves as feminists or privileged or whatever. But I do want to point out that several artists who came to the show said it made them feel nostalgic for an earlier period than what's going on in China right now, which I really want to make that point before we end this discussion, because right now in China, there's vehement nationalism in the messages from the central government and in what's being taught in art school. And it's a very different atmosphere than the atmosphere that these two artists grew up in. And also with COVID lockdowns and it's become really very difficult to travel from China. So I'm really curious what the next generation is going to be like, given that the possibilities and opportunities in some ways seem to be contracting.
So then, just to take the question back, those are very good points, Barbara. And I mean, Xi Jinping is making whatever art he is supporting is generally traditional and conservative. So that's kind of changing the whole movement, the whole conversation also. But and we can also talk about, or just underline the fact of self-censorship or just being careful, I mean, because everyone has access to everything. But that said, do you have thoughts about being a woman artist, a Chinese, or not, if you don't see yourself, or you do see yourself as Chinese, which you said you have? So
I just feel like I just want to add on. I feel like communism always encouraged the image of a strong woman in a way, because like my parents' generation, there is no such thing called housewife, because every parent has full-time job. So my mom doesn't have maternity leave. I believe like right after she gave birth to me, she went back to work immediately. And all the babies in my generation were formula babies. They're not encouraged, like breastfeeding or anything. And I also found like interesting, like after I came here, I realized that, a lot of my classmates from grad school, now they're married, having kids, and they all changed their name to their husband's name, which is, there's no such thing there. I think in Hong Kong and Taiwan, people do that. I'm not sure in Taiwan, but in Hong Kong, people does that. But in England, like, women married and they keep their family name. And I feel like in a way, maybe it explains why there's so many women artists, because I don't think, but it's mixed. It's a mixed bag, I have to say. Like there is a lot of, I think it's in a because old Chinese identities, like, women are more like they're, it's not just in Chinese culture. I think in the whole East Asia culture, maybe, men are more like dominant and women are more, obeying. But then in China, I feel like it's a mix of different influence.
And Shiyuan, do you have any thoughts on that, or?
Yeah, I remember that I actually didn't experience so much of gender differences through my childhood because we were all single child. You know, we didn't have siblings, brothers or sisters. So we were pretty much loved by the whole family. That's how also why in China that the grandparents are so into grandchildren, spoiling them. It's from maybe our generation, from the one single child policy. But I could only speak for Beijing, you know, and where I grew up. I could believe that in a lot of other cities in China, where because of the single child policy, there were a lot of abortions going on because everyone wants to get boys. But I have to say that although the whole thing turned around a bit also in China, there's still some very traditional issue, maybe not issue, traditions that people carry on, still is problematic in China. For example, wedding is maybe one of the most things that people want to carry the tradition. Nowadays, I feel the way people get married, the boy's family needs to pay a big amount of money to the girl's family. In a way, it feels like all the parents support young people's future life. It's in a positive way, but at the same time, it carries the feeling from the older China that I buy your daughter. You know, I use my payment to ask your daughter to marry to my family, so she will belong to us without she frequently coming back to you in the future. And then when the boy's parents get old, of course, the married to daughter will take care of the boy's parents mainly, instead of her own parents. So I think traditions we are still carrying some of them. Yes.
And in fact, there's been kind of a return now that the one-child policy is a two-child policy. There's a lot of pressure on young women to get married and reproduce as quickly as possible because of the problems that the one-child policy has caused, which is a shortage of people for the labor force and for taking care of elderly people. So now the whole thing has been a re-emphasis of gender roles. So again, it's going to be interesting how that affects the next generation.
Yeah, and there was a shortage of women also because
Right, and the shortage of
skewing
women.
the population. But anyway, this is fantastically interesting. But I think perhaps we can go on to the Q&A now, or
Okay, yes. So our first question is from Karina. Give me 1 second to get you. You should be able to unmute now.
Nice to see you again, Ying, and I'm happy to meet you virtually, Shiyuan. So my question is, do you feel like Xi Jinping's landmark speech on the role of art or artists during the Forum on Art and Literature held in 2014 has directly or indirectly influenced the work you produced? I mean, some creatives responded to it very positively. I believe there was an actor who actually, they felt that this was a really rousing speech, that an actor, a popular actor, claimed that he couldn't sleep, like it was literally rousing. So, do you feel like the way you work, the way you present yourselves as artists might be a direct action to the call, or as an oblique response to the statement?
And everyone, this is Karina Evangelista, who is the current director of the museum at Ages of Society. So, hey, Karina.
I think things has like kind of really changed since he was elected. I think when we grew up, there's I think the reason why, like Barbara mentioned, like people felt a little nostalgic is because like you kind of feel like, oh, you can't believe like the best days has already been gone. And I felt like growing up, like, especially my own experience, some of my work has to, do with censorship, but I was always like optimistic about how, technology and overall like what this brings to China. But like, I feel like recently it's definitely like, it's heavier, censorship's heavier, and like what you can say, like, TV shows that you can watch 10 years ago, like even in Hong Kong, like way before they had this law, like, yeah, I felt directly like, it's way stricter than before. I don't know, in terms of artists, I think in a way it can be a good thing because like it kind of forces artists to be more, you have to use metaphor and they have to add more layers to your work. So that might be a good thing, to be more, subtle about.
Thank you for your question, Karina, and for your answers, guys. Our next question is from Carolyn. So on you.
Hi, thank you all so much for this talk. It's been fascinating and to kind of see the focus be on identity, and as that informs your work. And I guess I'm curious about process, and maybe if each of you can speak. I know this is a large question, but to like the beginning stages of your work, kind of, maybe what inspires you, and then what the process of like making looks like for each of you.
Okay, you go first.
哎，你先说吧，我说了很多。
Yeah, you go first because go ahead, Shiyuan.
I'll go first.
First before we alternate.
I think from very, very early age, when I was 8 years old, I noticed that I love seeing pictures and commercial advertisements in Beijing. I think until now that I really, really care about how pictures are influencing our understandings. I remember there was one teacher taught me when I was in the university. She said, watch out the books you read and be very careful of the designs you see everywhere. She is a graphic designer who actually directly works on the function of images. But what she means is, even though you know the design is bad, you look through a bad design book and you give out a negative signal to yourself saying that you don't like it or you hate it, but it's still part of you. 10 years later, you read this book again, you know that you remember that you didn't like this book before, but you forgot why. So you start to like this book. This is how that seeing influence and twisting our memories. So I think all my art practice started from how we see things. When I was 8 years old, I joined a lot of like a professional, we call it a little bit cliche, photography competitions in Beijing. And I remember that the winner is always that their pictures are not even related to photography at all. I remember there was one time the winner of the competition shows like a long-time shot of a waterfall. But actually that picture everyone can do. You can set up your camera on a tripod and wait there for a while, then you'll get the same picture. So at that time, for me, I was really questioning why this is a winner, why this picture is better than the rest. Because for me, this is not related to the picture. This is basically saying, Oh, this is an award for the photographer because he carried a very heavy equipment all the way to the mountains and got this picture. And then for me, it was immoral to judge one photo work related to all the rest of the things outside of the frame. So I think this is what I have been doing through my whole art practice, questioning how should we see things in a high moral way. How should we create images without polluting the original meanings of the pictures? Yes.
I started to learning like drawing when I was really young, and my mom originally wanted me to study piano, but I had absolutely no talent like in music. And like I remember, because as only child, like I would be left home, which is totally illegal here in the States, like alone by myself since I was, I don't know, 4 or 5. And I would draw on all the furnitures at home, and my mom would came back and beat me. And then I was like trying to keep telling her, you know, I really like drawing. And then she eventually agreed, you know, to like send me to learn drawing, because like, again, like to get into art school is really hard, and you have to be very skillful in realist drawing and paintings. And I think when I was in college, I can like draw really, really well. And our department like was in first year of foundation, like we didn't choose like you don't know like which major you're gonna go into, and then instead the professor will come into foundation and they choose the students like they want. And I think a lot of the professors wanted me to go to oil painting, but I just felt like I couldn't do drawing anymore, or at least like for a really long time. I can't, because I had lost all my interests, and you know, I don't enjoy the process anymore. So I think that's why I got into technology, because I felt like it's such a struggle at the beginning, because I am really not I'm not talented in computer in by all means, and I didn't even know Photoshop, and felt like, you know, computer class all the time. But I felt it's by doing so technology, I lose some control. And I like how like it make me like as like using technology, like such as, you know, like the work that we're showing in the show, like using AI, like they're not perfect yet, and it kind of leads me to something that if I were doing drawing, then, you know, it might be too uptight, too intense, where I think technology is a good mix for me right now. That's why I think I'm enjoying of doing like even like installations, because installations that you always, there's something always like you can control, and then, but I like this kind of organic way of working with those ways of expressing my art.
Wow, thank you both so much for those answers.
Our next question is from Chloe. So you can unmute.
Yeah, first, I just want to say thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fantastic to learn about the show, as well as to learn about each of you as artists. I'm wondering, Barbara, you brought together so many talented artists with varied practices in this exhibition. And I would love to know from Shiyuan and Ying about what most surprised you being in conversation with the other artists in this exhibition. And, you know, just the process of being in a group show like this, and being in conversation with these other practitioners.
Well, before they answer, I just want to say one thing that was very interesting when I was curating the show is that a couple of artists said they did not want to be shown in an Asian context and declined being in the show for that reason. So I am really appreciative of all the artists with COVID and everything going on who agreed to be in the show. You know, that was an interesting dichotomy going on when I was putting it together. But Ying and Liu Shiyuan, is there anybody in the show that you felt like it's really strange being in the show with them?
That wasn't quite the question, but I like it.
All right, that was my interpretation. Okay, Chloe,
My-
let's go back to you.
My question was more about surprise or, surprise and connections between your work and someone else's, or maybe artists that you wouldn't have naturally been in conversation with otherwise, but you found had a connection. I don't want to lead in too much because I'm curious how you interpret the question, but. Maybe starting with Ying.
They're so polite. They're waiting for you to designate.
I just felt like in one thing, like we all share this nostalgic, which I think is like the first time that I see like in kind of in common. I always felt that it was just me, like, and I think like our generation, like one thing, because we kind of witnessed this like materialism gap. What I think the younger generation, I mean, younger, like 10 years or, 15 years younger than us, is that they haven't experienced the gap. Like for them, they really truly was born, everything was open after, like if you were born in the 90s, then you're just like, you really embraced to it, like the Western culture. At least I felt like for me, I felt it's a good experience that, when I remember how, when China was really poor and when we were in elementary school, the beginning, that's part of the reason why KFC was such a big deal, because before that there was only one brand of pencil, one brand of, school bags. There wasn't like the material wasn't, booming. So I think, yeah, I feel like I'm surprised that everyone, like when we were doing panels, everyone was, feeling the same way. And I'm also, like Barbara, I'm curious of like how the younger generation felt about their identity of being Chinese.
Actually, this is also the question maybe I want to ask Barbara, because creating a Chinese artist show, how difficult that you have to select, because in order to show a Chinese artist show, you have to include all Chinese artists, right? But I can imagine that when me and Miao Ying, we become like 50 years old, and then the next generation will create a Chinese artist show, and then they will consider us like those guys have been having too much attention when they were young. Yeah,
that's really funny to me.
I have the same question.
Is that how you feel about Lin Tia Miao and Yun Shujian?
I feel lucky.
So,
I mean, don't get me wrong. I love the people that I met in the early 2000s who had emerged in the 1990s are heroes to me because of the amount of obstacles they had to overcome. And they are really wonderful people. I mean, really wonderful people and great artists. But since I saw these changes happening just from each trip to China, I thought, what would it be like living there and trying to make a painting with all these changes going on around you? And Ying is right. This was the generation that grew up before capitalism. And then suddenly it was, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then it was Gucci bags in the knockoffs of Gucci bags in the silk market. And I used to say that what was authentically Chinese was not Ming furniture, or if I move it up to today, it's not Ming furniture, it's furniture from IKEA, all of which was made in China.
Not all, Barbara, not all, much.
Oh, am I wrong?
Yeah, I think not all. I was corrected on that, by the way, when I made that comment.
Oh, okay. So I'm making a mistake, but a lot of it is coming from China.
It's a lot.
And, what is authentically Chinese becomes a different question. I saw it becoming a different question while I was trying to keep up with the developments in the art. Those were the kind of artworks I was looking for this exhibition. I found that these large-scale exhibitions that introduce 30 Chinese artists become impossible to comprehend because of the wide range of practices, and names are difficult for American audiences to retain. I thought if we picked 7 artists and really showed their work, there might be a chance that people could remember the artist and the artworks and also get a specific point of view on it rather than encyclopedic knowledge of it. So that was, does that, I think that answers what Liu Shiyuan was asking you.
That was incredible. Thank you to all of you for those answers and for continuing the question with another question.
Okay, and our final question is from Fang Bui, but I'm going to ask it on his behalf. So his question is, China has created a hybrid model of simultaneously maintaining a strict communist discipline while adapting to the free market economy. How does this hybrid model affect artistic expression?
Small question.
Well, I think the examples in the show something about how that's affecting creative people living in China or having grown up in China. I also think that each of these things are evolving even as we speak. So that one thing I've really learned is that you can never be an authority on China because things are changing so rapidly and there's 5,000 years of culture behind it. But I think that the artists I picked for this show show something about that balancing act between ideology and economics and how that affects the creative mind, which means you're not going to see charts drawing it all out. You're going to see metaphors. And I think the artists did a really good job with that.
And also perhaps just to wrap it up in that regard, that like China now has the ability to support its artists and has a desire to support contemporary artists, which wasn't there before. So that's another, kind of change. And then what's going to happen now? I mean, as we know, we never can predict it.
But I think
that is there, right?
It should be noted that there's more than 12 contemporary art museums in Shanghai right now. That couldn't be without government support, even as censorship is going on. So,
and all the private museums,
and all the private museums, but the private museums couldn't be there without government support either. So, it's going to be interesting to see how all of this plays out, and I'm really curious if I can ever get back there, which I don't know.
Well, we hope to all get back there.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Thank you, Miao Ying, and thank you, Liu Shiyuan. So great.
Thank you all. This was a really amazing conversation, and I'm really happy to have had all of you guys here and to host and we'll be MC. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending all of our conversations with a poetry reading. And so I'm glad to welcome our poet of the day, Abby Romine. Abby Romine is a senior writing major at Pratt Institute. She's a sentimental poet and ceramicist from the San Fernando Valley, looking for memory in all the wrong places.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to be reading a poem called I'm Cutting the String of Time with My Teeth. I keep falling on love instead of in, right, left, but also up. I'm in my sight. I'm a slow processor. I can't stop being weird and weepy. I'm expelling it through my tongue. All my habits are unfortunate. It's the moon inside me and the void around my neck, manipulated under one sun, not paced in reality. I'm a human hyperlink, telling myself who I am every day because I tend to forget there's a line to follow. I don't think I was built for a path because I hate forks, and I'm all swallowed up and that numb spot on my back is spreading to my tongue. Neighborhood has too many letters, love doesn't have enough. Love on your right forearm, a mode that can be switched on and off. Once I read these 2 used books on OCD, I'm sure I'll be perfect. I'll be an endless thermos with a spoonful of rice for everyone. Women lose so much heat from their heads, Mary Louise says. I don't tell her I run hot and could benefit from losing some. I forgot what it felt like. There's a stasis, but be real. Do you think I'm hot when I'm anxious? I keep thinking about spirals. They make me nervous because I never know when to stop. I'm always spiraling and people think that's a bad thing, but they don't know I'm an upward spiral. I'm always going up. Coney Island is like totally gonna fix me, I tell everyone. The distance in me recognizes the distance in you. I only wish you'd tell me to come a little closer in either direction, or sit on my shoulder and tell me I'm beautiful and not a bad person. Because right now, I only want to hear things that are totally wonderful or horrifically terrible. Confronted by the reality of the lived space of your memories, dwelling can be other people, dwelling can be you. I can make a home out of all of your pieces. I walk on the sidewalk like God and the government intended, hostile buildings and perceived boundaries. First it was a hole and then it was something to put in the hole. I'm excavating the obsession. I was born loud, so was my mother, I say too loudly. I was barely a thought in the 90s. I'm trying to get back to that. But you said and I became. Turn my thumbs into teeth so no one asks me to smile again. You can't tell because I'm wearing a mask, but I'm laughing my ass off at the thought of waking up tomorrow, at the thought of driving behind the wheel again. I'm always disintegrating from adoration. I'm always carrying invisible rocks and one real one that reminds me of my mother. It's smooth and heart adjacent and the true gray like the sky before it rains. So when someone says my bag is heavy, I tell them, I keep my mother in there. No, really. And then I say, okay, it's rocks. And then they laugh. Nobody takes me seriously. I come from a long line of women who say don't when you take a picture of us. It's because we're modest in the same way a flower grows down instead of up towards the sun. I like when things reach in a silent way, all acid and tender. The sun and moon are on either side of you. I'm in the unnameable spot where saxophones and harmonicas play, and summer is so sweet. Not summer, it's spring. It's a song for hares, and everything feels like that shade of green up there. Perpetual sentiment. I guess that just means that everyone is vibrating. I'd always rather be the snail than the sparrow. The snail in my ear is telling me to pray to God. The snail in my ear is telling me to think of you sweetly and often. The snail in my ear is telling me everyone in heaven has vertigo. In heaven, everyone is kissing. The snail in my ear is telling me Coney Island is never gonna fix me. I wake up like I owe everyone everything. I wake up like I need to be born. I'm talking to the universe, but the universe is scanning the room for the next conversation. Can you believe it? The universe is a room scanner. Maybe I can come up with a better God, Anahita says. Maybe I can take the magic out of everything and tell you what I really mean. I want you to touch right between my eyes because I'm dirty until I'm cleansed. I should be worshiping water. I should be treating everything as sacred. I should be treating everyone as holy, but I keep a close list of people who can't be sharpened. And one of dead celebrities I think would have enjoyed the reality TV show Jersey Shore. I tell my mother I don't want to be alive again. Don't die, I'll be so mad at you, she says. Tonight I'll walk just enough, fit to the eye, and I'm all love. This unspeakability, a mental enema. What vessel do you channel through? I sit holding the remote. I channel through little walks, celebration my only intention. We're on the F when Lee takes my hand and says, your nails are strong for a girl that's falling apart. She doesn't know that I know that love is a basin. And then all of a sudden you're taking over, or I'm taking over the light. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Abby. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Barbara, Shiyuan, Ying, Lilly. And we'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible. And thank you for our support of our continuously growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on the Rails YouTube channel. Over the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has brought together art, music, dance, film, theater, literature, and thoughtful social and political meditations in our monthly publication and in our public events, like here in our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support our writers, editors, and operations here at the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for our 98th Radical Poetry Reading, featuring poetry read by Steph Gray, Julian Talamontes Berlasky, Brenda Coltes, Jen/Elena Holfer, and Brenda Ijima. You can now turn on your microphone and say goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
So much. Thank you.
So great.
Bye.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Fungbei.
Thank you. Congratulations, and go see the show, please, everyone.
Yeah, everyone go see the show. And really
Yes,
thank you to
absolutely.
Asia
Thank
Society
you.
for making this possible. And
Congratulations.
Brooklyn Rail.
We are working in unison.
We are working in unison.
Absolutely. Thank you, Barbara. Congratulations, big show. Thank you, Lilly. Thank you, Sing.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Sharon.
Thank you.
all.
Let's
Thank
go
you.
have lunch.
I am leaving. I love it all. Mwah.
Everyone
up?
too.
Thank you, Rita.